Bitcoin is actually one of those things that gives me hope, because I do think that it helps people understand the current economic system that we have better. It provides an opportunity to transition to a better economic system if people learn about it and buy into it. And there's a huge cascading effects of that, right? You have a totally different incentive structure between politicians and voters. You have monetary technology that can be used to save instead of consume, like endlessly consume. You're incentivized to save now. You don't need to become an expert investor just to hold on to a store of value. You're not buying a home and pricing people out of purchasing a home just to store your value. Bitcoin can provide the opportunity to build out renewable energy, more stable, more secure renewable energy sources all around the world. It has a potential to change how we pay for and fund wars and make wars less deadly, less common. Bitcoin is a step zero for all of that. Like, if we adopt Bitcoin and people truly understand its power and the ability to take the monetary technology away from a powerful institution in the government, then it requires the government to be more transparent, more honest with its people, and then it gives people power to do the things that they want to do without fear of having their money confiscated or frozen or stolen.
We recently had the privilege of sitting down with a remarkable individual. Jason Maier is the author of A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin. His book offers a refreshing and deeply progressive perspective on why Bitcoin matters. It delves into why Bitcoin is not just a financial innovation, but a force for positive change, addressing critical issues like environmental sustainability, financial inclusion for the marginalized, and even as a means of protest against the dominance of too-big-to-fail banks. Jason's work fills a crucial gap in the Bitcoin discourse, providing an accessible starting point for those curious about Bitcoin beyond the conventional conservative and libertarian narratives.
I'm certainly not unique in the Bitcoin space as a progressive. There's a community of progressives out there. The community is smaller and quiet because the loudest voices are the ones who are talking about these conservative and libertarian ideas, which I totally get. There's liberal politicians out there who are giving misinformation about Bitcoin or misunderstanding it themselves, and so the voters don't have the information that they need.
With endorsements from prominent figures like macroeconomist Lynn Alden, podcaster Peter McCormack, and founder of Black Bitcoin Billionaires, Lamar Wilson, Jason Maier is reshaping the conversation around Bitcoin, urging us all to consider its profound implications for social progress and equality.
I've been teaching high school math for the last 16 years. All levels of high school math, from algebra through post-calculus electives. And I've been into Bitcoin for a few years now. People kind of have a sense that like different things are used for money throughout history, right? So like salt, gold, seashells, right? Like we know that that's true. What makes something a good form of money and what makes it valuable? And there's different characteristics that you need. For thousands of years, gold served that purpose really well. One of the problems with gold is very heavy, hard to move around, hard to secure, hard to transport, hard to verify. Over time, you end up with this sort of money, which is gold, and then this currency, which is paper. And you can trade in the paper and get your gold back at any time. But in the meantime, it's very easy to sort of move paper around. FDR comes into power, like he confiscates all of the gold from the American public, says, all right, you need to bring in gold except for these very few exceptions, and we'll give you dollars in exchange. Let's group together, let's do the right thing, let's give the government our gold because we're in a recession and we need to do a Great Depression, that kind of thing. And then we can trust the government with this paper. A couple of months later, slashed the value of gold, inflated the dollar amount, and said, so like the dollars that you gave your gold for, if you gave 1 ounce, a few months ago, with the paper you have now, you can only buy, a fraction of that. The connection between gold and the paper starts to get tenuous, and then gold is outlawed. Like, the American citizen can't own gold as an investment vehicle, as a store of value. It's just outlawed until the 70s. Over time, you end up with this sort of gradual deterioration of that connection between gold and paper, the dollar bills that we know, until the point where that gold window was completely closed in the 70s by Richard Nixon. So now we're just based on a completely fiat system where the dollar bills that you have can't be traded in for any hard money, like any real valued asset. And so you're just trusting that, in the faith and credit of the US government to back those dollars. Dollars are easy money in the sense that they're easy to create. Gold is a hard money because it is difficult to create. It's hard to create. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of different avenues that we could talk about. Ultimately, we're at this point now where everybody is just forced to use dollar bills or the dollars that they have in their bank account, not really thinking about why is that money? Why is that good money? Does money have to come from the government? These are really good questions to be asking yourself. And then you kind of flip it on its head and say, well, if I can get past the idea that money has to come from the government, which has not historically been the case, then what does make good money? And the properties that you want in good money, Bitcoin has all of them, except possibly acceptance, right? So people need to accept it, and we see that increasing all the time. And it's hard money, it's scarce. It's hard to make more Bitcoin, or impossible at some point. So you have this property of money that dollars will never have because dollars are easy. It's literally button press, and more dollars exist. The value of the dollar will trend towards its marginal cost to produce, which is zero, and we see that happening all the time. Most people think about inflation as prices going up instead of the value of their money going down. But if you're a Bitcoiner, you usually think about the value of your money going down. That wasn't always the case. In the 1800s, prices would go up sometimes, but they would also go down. And so the sort of price fluctuations you would see in the monetary supply and the cost of things from 1800 to 1899 was fairly flat. If you were a kid in 1899, you weren't hearing stories about how much was a candy bar when my grandma was a kid. You have a large stretch of time where prices were pretty stable. Of course, that's not the case now. There's lots of reasons why it is the way it is now. There's lots of different avenues of history to go down. Certainly the history of money is fascinating and something that people don't usually think about. And the solution that we have in Bitcoin is sort of a new way of thinking about money that we really haven't had before. And so it's exciting that we might actually have sort of a path forward for a more prosperous future, a more fair future. And that's what excites me about Bitcoin. Do you care about the environment? Do you care about women's rights in America and beyond? Do you care about the way that imperial forces are forcing poor nations into a trajectory of being poor indefinitely? Bitcoin itself is an apolitical tool. There's no politics written into the code of it. It just sort of is what it is. It works. We know that it works. It's reliable. And it's a tool that people can use for whatever ends that they want to use it for. So Bitcoin itself, in a very technical aspect, doesn't adhere to any sort of progressive or liberal agenda. It just is a monetary tool. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Bitcoin is saying, let's think about what life looks like in 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years, not what it looks like the next quarter. What do the profit statements look like for the next, report? What about the next 4 years for the election cycle? It sort of transcends all of that because you're thinking about long-term stuff. And a lot of the problems that we have in our world require long-term thinking. We're not gonna get there with sort of, how do I get elected in 2 to 4 years? In the book I talk about this idea of cathedral thinking, where you have cathedrals in Europe that were built over the course of 500 years. Generations of people devoting a life's worth of work into a building that they'll never see completed. And those are some of the problems that we have now require that kind of thinking, right? The idea that we're going to, protect the environment and reduce global climate change is one of those things that requires long-term thinking. You can't say, well, what do my profits look like this quarter? It requires generations of people working towards something that they might not see the end of. When you see your purchasing power sticking around, you're going to buy things, but you're not incentivized to just purchase and consume and then throw something out and get a new one. You just go about the world in a different way. This might be worth $20, but is it worth the equivalent amount of Bitcoin? I don't know. So you're making purchasing decisions from the ground up very differently, and I think that's true for the general population and probably true for politicians eventually if we get there. Companies are not incentivized to treat their customers in a way that says, I'm going to give you a quality product, you're going to have it the rest of your life. That's just not the way it is anymore. And I think that Bitcoin at least gives a hope that maybe we start thinking differently. If everybody in the world is a Bitcoiner and thinking about Bitcoiners, like, we're not buying the cheap plastic crap anymore. We're going to buy the quality thing that's going to last. And whether that's a blender or a house or a car or like a building or a government or whatever, right? We're going to be thinking about long-term things. One of the misconceptions about the environment is that like any energy use is going to be bad. And so you see this a lot where people just make claims like, oh, Bitcoin wastes energy, or look how much energy Bitcoin is using. Energy use is needed and an important part of our society, and that's true around the world. We see flourishing when energy is being used, like then that happens, better medicine, better food, better quality of life, like that's part of society. Just because the energy is being used doesn't mean it's bad. The second thing is a lot of people don't really understand how our electrical grid works, even at a foundational level. There are inefficiencies baked into any renewable energy source. It's very dirty to burn coal or oil to like create electricity, but it's super reliable and like can happen all the time, and you never have to worry about clouds or wind dying down, right? So you have this intermittent energy source in renewables where a lot of people on the left want to see those happen, including me, but you have to find a way to balance out the grid in terms of the renewable energy sources being intermittent, where sometimes the sun isn't shining and sometimes the wind isn't blowing, like, or you get more energy than you need. Like, what is the solution to all of that? And one of the things that we can do is build out our renewable capacity to be more than what we need. Bitcoin mining can sort of take the excess, which isn't taking electricity away from anybody that needs it, but we're using the solar and the wind energy that nobody's using in that moment. A Bitcoin miner can be powered down instantly, synchronized perfectly to the demand that is needed. So if all of a sudden there is an increase in demand because there's a heat wave and more people are turning on their air conditioners, Bitcoin miners are able to power down in like real time to give that energy back to the grid that is demanding it. This demand response makes it possible for renewables to actually be an option for consumers, for large energy grids, for power companies in a way that no other technology can. There's wasted energy all over the place. How can we actually utilize that energy? How can we incentivize the build out of more renewable energy? Bitcoin mining has a place in all of that. Right now, for a poorer nation to actually get some economic benefit, they need to essentially come with their hat in their hand to the World Bank or IMF. They're getting loans from these international organizations that are essentially run by the United States in terms that are not favorable to them. Bitcoin provides an opportunity for a nation that fits that category to say, all right, well, I'm going to use the natural resources that we have, like hydro, wind, solar, to generate Bitcoin, which is not controlled by the United States. It's not controlled by the IMF or the World Bank. Like, they actually have this financial sovereignty now because they're devoting their natural resource. Instead of exporting out natural resources to wealthy Western nations, they actually can use them to generate a secure financial, like monetary technology like Bitcoin. That's super powerful because it sort of flips the tables in terms of power. And a lot of these places are resource rich, but sort of economically colonialized in a way that disadvantages them. Yeah, people ask me that a lot. Like, how do we get to this point? Are the people in charge evil? Are they making bad decisions? Are they making mistakes? And I don't think that any of that's true. I don't think that the people in power, by and large, are like evil people. I think that we just have systems in place that sort of incentivize this behavior. Unfortunately, just sort of where we are, we have a broken monetary system that does not incentivize good faith acting, accurate economic information being put out there. It incentivizes short-term thinking from both companies and government officials. So we are where we are now because of a lot of people being incentivized to think short-term inside large organizations which aren't really nimble and able to act to realities on the ground. And we end up with this big mess that we have now, which I don't think that there's many people who are paying attention, who are like, oh yeah, things are going really well. Like, on both sides of the political spectrum, I think that people are saying like, man, the world is kind of crazy right now. And they're not quite yet able to make that connection to like the underlying monetary structure that like undergirds the whole system. The whole system is kind of messed up and negative and bad. I read a lot of bad news, but like that's doesn't have anything to do with like using green paper money. I think that Bitcoiners are trying to like open people's eyes to the fact that there's actually is probably a connection there, and we need to understand it better. none of the priorities that any politicians are having right now, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, is being paid for because we're saying like, hey, we're going to tax you, but this is why we're taxing you, and this is what we're going to use the money for. And that's ultimately the hope and the goal. Right now, politicians are getting sort of a blank check to say, we're going to give you these things because we know that you want them, but we're not going to tax you, we're not going to make you pay for it. Right now, it just feels like this mysterious, like, oh, well, the government's just going to go into more debt, and nobody really thinks about, well, what are the long-term implications of that? Like, that house of cards crumbles at some point. You have a pretend money, it's not backed by anything, it's easy to make, and that's just going to cause more trouble. I think Bitcoin provides a different situation. Bitcoin is saying, well, yeah, you can provide free school lunches to people who can't afford it, or you can help pay for community college for people, but we're going to actually have to tax you for that because we can't just print more Bitcoin. We're all taught economics in school at some level, and you just taught these things that, like, you grow up thinking, well, it has to be this way. Like, you have to have inflation in order to have growth in the economy. Well, that's not true. We can't keep just printing money and then thinking there's no consequences for it, right? And you don't need to be a conservative Republican to say that. You can have things. You can have a large government even. You just need to be able to find a way to pay for it that isn't sort of printing money and slowly stealing purchasing power away from like the everyday person or like, normal working people. We're not even really practicing Keynesian economics in the way that it was intended in the first place, right? Like, oh, we have high government spending when we need to get ourselves out of the recession, and then we'll increase taxes and lower our spending in good times. We don't do that. There's no politician, oh, look at how well things are going, let's increase taxes now and reduce our spending. It just is always up, right? It's a ratchet. It goes up and up and up. So what we're dealing with is not actually like Keynesian economics either. See what it looks like to have economic prosperity in a non-inflationary world where your purchasing power is protected. I think that ultimately produces a better version of the world that I would like to see, is for people to work hard, save their money, make economic decisions based on the reality on the ground instead of being worried that they're going to lose purchasing power if they don't act now. Like, all of those things are going to be better for the world if we can do it. The government's incentivized to have inflation, right? They want to have 2-3% inflation. It's going to sort of chip away at their debt over time so that when they pay it back, it's actually less in real terms. But that's also deteriorating all of the savings accounts in America, all of the people that work for a living. It's making prices go up for them too. What's the cost of that constant growth, that constant debt, that constant, like, I need to produce more? It's harmful to everyday Americans, it's harmful to the environment, and it's not sustainable. So you're going to have a bust at some point, no matter what. People are struggling to get by. You can see that with grocery bills and rent and all sorts of things. And I hope that we can transition to a Bitcoin standard so that there's more honest economic activity and a more transparent dialogue between voters and politicians. I don't want people to turn to Bitcoin out of a space of desperation that everything else is ruined. My hope is that people can see this other economic system that works and is beneficial to people and society and can actually help people before it's too late or before it's actually needed desperately. And if your money is constantly being deteriorated in terms of its purchasing power, you have to find some other way to preserve that value. Well, for most Americans, at least, that's buying a home. Well, what that does is put a monetary premium on homes, right? You're no longer paying just for a place to live, like a dwelling. You're actually paying this increased monetary premium because we're using houses and homes to serve as one of the functions that our money is supposed to serve as. Bitcoin, with a lot of hard work and a lot of education, can actually get us on the right track. It doesn't necessarily solve all the problems immediately, but I think it's step zero. You have this petrodollar system where the dollar is kind of backed by oil, which everybody needs. The United States benefits because now they can buy oil with dollars and they can just print the dollars. Other nations aren't able to do that, including sort of our adversaries during the Cold War aren't able to do that. And it puts America at this huge advantage and solidifies the dollar as the global reserve currency. But it also provides this perverse relationship with Saudi Arabia where we're looking the other way to sort of human rights catastrophes and atrocities that are happening since the 1970s, almost nonstop. And we're still providing them with weapons and intelligence support and all of that stuff as sort of a military ally. Despite sort of public outcry, all of the presidents that we've had since Nixon have talked tough about Saudi Arabia until they get into power and realize the relationship and then sort of backtrack. America has to turn the other way, where, okay, we're going to assassinate a journalist, we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to invade another country, we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to have really poor, women's rights, we're not going to do anything about it. We're still going to support this nation and this country and this group of countries. Most people understand that war is an expensive enterprise, but I don't think that most people really understand exactly how expensive. So if we decide we want to invade a country in the Middle East and stay there for the next 20 years and have billions and trillions of dollars pour into that country and lose lots of lives in the process, like, we can afford that without the American population having to ration their food or their gasoline or pay higher taxes or even buy war bonds. Like, none of that's happening. And yet America's at war, off and on in all over the world for decades and decades. And the American people are no longer feeling a pinch of saying all right, well, this war is really important, and I understand why I have to ration my butter and my eggs, and I have to pay higher taxes because we're at war, and that's super important. The aspiration is that under a Bitcoin standard, you have a monetary technology that you can't just make more of. You have to actually put in an expenditure of energy to get more Bitcoin. Then in that world, you go into making decisions about going to war much differently. You can't eliminate war or conflict, but what you can do is make it costly, in the sense that if in order to engage in a conflict or a war, I need to be intentional about what it costs me, what it costs my people, and whether or not I want to do it. Bitcoin is actually one of those things that gives me hope, because I do think that it helps people understand the current economic system that we have better. It provides an opportunity to transition to a better economic system if people learn about it and buy into it. And there's a huge cascading effects of that, right? You have a totally different incentive structure between politicians and voters. You have monetary technology that can be used to save instead of consume, endlessly consume. You're incentivized to save now. You don't need to become an expert investor just to hold on to a store of value. You're not buying a home and pricing people out of purchasing a home just to store your value. Bitcoin can provide the opportunity to build out renewable energy, more stable, more secure renewable energy sources all around the world. It has a potential to change how we pay for and fund wars and make wars less deadly, less common. Bitcoin is a step zero for all of that. If we adopt Bitcoin and people truly understand its power and the ability to take the monetary technology away from a powerful institution in the government, then it requires the government to be more transparent, more honest with its people, and then it gives people power to do the things that they want to do without fear of having their money confiscated or frozen or stolen. Either before the next crisis or during the next crisis, we actually have a lifeboat. We have a new version of money that we can get on board with and actually use to really productive ends if we can just continue to learn about it and grow the awareness of not only the problems but the potential solutions through Bitcoin.
Our conversation with Jason Maier has illuminated a path toward understanding that Bitcoin transcends political boundaries. Jason's refreshing, liberal perspective on Bitcoin is an essential bridge that can help bring together individuals from all walks of life. In a world where divisions run deep, his insights remind us that the potential benefits of Bitcoin are universal, touching upon our collective desire for a more equitable, environmentally responsible, and inclusive future. We hope this conversation has provided a thought-provoking glimpse into how Bitcoin can catalyze positive change, and we thank you for tuning into our channel today. This was our first Bit Intelligence original interview. Comment below if you liked it, and let us know who we should reach out to next. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this every week. We'll see you next time.